Welcome to the National Interest Speakers Series.
My name is Justine Rosenthal. I am the editor of the National Interest, and I am here today with Ambassador Richard Burt. I'm going to run through a little bit of your bio before we dive into START.
All right.
You are currently at McLarty & Associates, but you were ambassador to Germany in that vital period right before reunification. You also, under H.W. Bush, were the U.S. negotiator on START, and you are the chairman of Global Zero, which obviously advocates a nuclear-free world, or at least that's my understanding of it. So with that said, there could be no one better to talk to about Senator Kyl and the blocking of New START. Why don't you just launch into why you think that that's a terrible idea, because I assume you do.
Well, I think that it's a terrible idea, as you put it, for really four reasons.
Okay.
First of all, and quickly, the agreement itself represents a modest step towards U.S.-Russian arms reduction. It will reduce both sides' arsenals by roughly 25%. But both sides will still have roughly the same number of nuclear warheads as at the high point of the Cold War in the early 1960s, during, say, the Cuban Missile Crisis period. So both sides will still retain clearly enough capability to destroy the other. The verification regime it has been perfected over the last 15 years since the agreement. I participated in negotiating, so I don't think there's a really strong case against that. The treaty on verification grounds. It will provide for on-site inspection and very intrusive data exchange. And there are no limits on American or Russian options in the area of strategic defense. So I think in terms of the treaty, the terms of the treaty itself, the details, the technicalities, I don't think there's a major showstopper. The major issue that John Kyl has raised is on the question of the American nuclear stockpile and the need to modernize it. In other words, the nuclear weapons complex, the R&D, the research and development, and the actual construction of nuclear weapons. And there the administration has bent backwards, went overboard to meet his concerns, offering more than $85 billion over the next 10 years to keep the nuclear weapons complex modernized and capable. The real problem in not ratifying START is that if this treaty goes by the boards, I think the U.S.-Russian arms control process will basically die out. I don't think we will see another negotiation for several years. And that means we're going to miss the opportunity to go to deeper cuts, which I think are possible. But more importantly, I think the next big idea in arms control is to multilateralize this process, to bring other nuclear powers into the negotiation, like China, India, Pakistan, and others. And I think through a multilateral arms control process, you have a real impact on nuclear proliferation. I think it becomes possible for the international community then to stigmatize nuclear weapons to the point that countries like Iran and others who want to acquire those weapons are going to see or have to overcome political obstacles that today don't exist.
Let me pose to you some of the counter arguments to this.
Sure.
Okay. Because I think that there are a substantial number of them. One is that the U.S. has cut a bad deal with Russia. It's advantageous to the Russians' New START much more so than to the Americans. That what the Americans are getting out of it, besides potentially bolstering the reset, is unclear. That some of the arguments you make about eventually multilateralizing the process will have no more or less effect on the U.S. ability to prevent Iran from going nuclear. That why would that now be the case?
Well, I think we would be, first of all, with the Iranian issue, I think we would be handing Mr. Ahmadinejad his talking points for justifying their nuclear program if we didn't ratify this treaty. We've got to remember, we're signatories to the 1968 Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, and in which in Article 6, the United States and other nuclear powers committed themselves to nuclear disarmament. This is a clear sign, non-ratification would be a clear sign that we weren't serious about that commitment. And I think any country that wanted to justify its nuclear program, either Iran, North Korea, or others, can say, look what the two major nuclear powers have failed to do. If they can't reduce beyond 2,200 nuclear weapons apiece, and that's the existing agreements, then how in the world can they criticize us for maintaining wanting to build a small stockpile? Secondly, you talk about reset and the U.S.-Russia relationship. I mean, I think, in fact, the Russians in the last year or so have moved towards the United States in a number of important ways. They've agreed to put sanctions on Iran at the UN Security Council. They've abandoned their plans to provide the Iranians with the S-300 advanced air defense missiles. They are fully cooperating with the United States and the NATO allies in Afghanistan. Now, it's interesting to ask, well, what have they actually gotten in return for this? And I think what they hope to get in return for this is, A, to get this treaty, because I don't think it's a bad deal. I think they like it mainly psychologically in terms of it allows them to say that in terms of overall nuclear capability, they're roughly equal to the world's most powerful country. And I think that's the key advantage they see from START. And secondly, what they're hoping they'll achieve next year is WTO accession and the lifting of Jackson-Bannock, which just
explain for our viewers Jackson-Bannock. I mean, we hear this always from the Russians, but
that is the Cold War provision that driven by Scoop Jackson and Charlie Bannock in the 1970s, which said there would not be normalized trade between the United States and the Soviet Union as long as Jews in the Soviet Union were not allowed to emigrate. And as the Russians never tire of pointing out that since the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, any Jew in the now Russian Federation has been free to leave Russia, and of course millions have. Many have gone to Israel, many have gone to the United States, but it bothers them that Jackson-Bannock is still in place.
Let me ask you why you think that is. You know, as we said, we hear it all the time. It often boggles my mind that we haven't gotten rid of it, but also that the Russians are still talking about it. How does that get held up? Something so easy to give them.
The reason it gets held up, and it's interesting to reflect on the fact that George W. Bush told Vladimir Putin on two different occasions when he was president that he would get it lifted. And the reason it wasn't lifted is it's become a convenient vehicle for any member of Congress who has a complaint, a trading complaint that has to do with the Russian Federation, will withhold support for Jackson-Bannock in order to pressurize the Russians to give. And a good example of that is the famous case of chickens. You know, the European Union bans the import of American chickens because they are washed, cleaned, so to speak, with chlorine. Russia has decided to adopt the same position as the EU on the issue of chickens and chlorine washing. As a result, we have not been able to export any of these chickens to Russia, and the farm lobby in the Congress has said, well, as long as they have that policy, we won't lift Jackson-Bannock. So the reason the Russians don't like it is not only psychologically kind of humiliating, they're getting kind of strong-armed by this legislation, but every time they turn around, they get Jackson-Bannock dangled in front of their face on some trade item or some trade issue that is currently heating up in the relationship.
Well, let me go from chickens back to nuclear weapons.
Good.
I never thought I would be talking about chickens at TNI. 1, 2, 3 agreement. I mean, I don't want to get overly technical
Right.
here, but you know, another one of the arguments is 1, 2, 3 agreement is going to go through. Maybe it's more important than New START. Maybe the Obama administration shouldn't be saying, Senator Kyle and co, you are ruining everything for us in the reset, and concentrate their efforts more on 1, 2, 3, and then let New START come later. Can you explain, you know, how you see that, what the 1, 2, 3 agreement is really about?
Well, the 1, 2, 3 agreement is essentially an agreement that will make it easier for the United States and Russia to cooperate on nuclear technology and civilian or peaceful nuclear energy. It's similar, actually, to the agreement that the United States negotiated very successfully with India. There are a lot of technical issues having to do with the agreement and environmental issues, but nuclear energy and peaceful uses of nuclear power are something that the Russians are quite good at.
Mm-hmm.
They have a number of nuclear power reactors. In fact, they've sold a famous Bashir reactor to the Iranians. So this is an area where actually the United States and Russia could probably, working together, could deal with environmental issues and energy dependency by collaborating on new generations of nuclear power reactors that wouldn't produce, by the way, fissile material that we use for nuclear weapons. And so it generally makes sense. But it doesn't have, I think, the strategic weight. It doesn't have the political importance that both sides attach to a strategic arms reduction treaty. And I think we have to think about the debate within Moscow on the whole question of working with the United States, and this is where START, I think, is maybe not understood as well in Washington as it should be, and that is Dmitry Medvedev has really based his position as president on his capacity to work with the Obama administration. And the first real achievement that flowed out of that the Obama-Medvedev channel was a START agreement. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people who support Medvedev in Russia call them liberalizers or integrationists, i.e. they want Russia more integrated into the Western system, so believe that getting START ratified and then moving on to things like the 1, 2, 3 agreement or lifting Jackson-Vanik will strengthen Medvedev's position vis-a-vis Putin and make it possible that Medvedev will continue to serve as president beyond 2012, the next presidential election.
Which you think would be a good thing for Washington?
I think it would be good for U.S. interests to have Medvedev remain as president. I think there are some signs that Putin's position has shifted somewhat and that he is moving towards a more favorable attitude towards the United States. But nevertheless, there, I think, is a very deep-seated debate in Russia now over where they fit into the international system. And I think there are some older Russians who still harbor the dream of a more independent Russia, a Russia that pursues its own interests, that is more autonomous from the West, and isn't afraid to confront the West. And I think there's a younger generation of Russians, ones that were not educated and didn't necessarily grow up in the Soviet Union, and didn't work in the Soviet Union, who are now coming to the fore, who understand that really the future of Russia is cooperating with the West. I think with this START debate, we can influence this debate for better or for worse.
Well, let me end with a yes or no question on that then. Will START get ratified?
I believe that it will get ratified. The real question is whether it gets ratified during this lame duck session or it gets ratified maybe next spring. Maybe you could say, well, gee, what's the difference then? Well, the difference is that I think we could do a lot of damage to the U.S.-Russia relationship if we don't ratify it sooner and we wait till later.
Ambassador, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Justine.